This video is on how does a joint replacement work. Well, if anything good can be said about arthritis, it's that arthritis is actually easy to understand. The fun thing about arthritis is it just makes good old common sense. You don't have to be a doctor to understand it. Arthritis is simply caused by wearing away the cartilage that protects the ends of the bones where they come together to form a joint. So let's draw a normal knee joint. A normal knee joint is formed by two bones, the upper bone and the lower bone. And those bones don't touch each other because there's a cushion in between the two bones. What's the name of that cushion? You probably answered cartilage. I heard you out there, I know you did. And that's right, it's cartilage. Now that cartilage is amazing stuff because it can decrease the friction between the two bones, and it's perfectly designed to be a shock absorber. And that's because of the unique biochemistry of cartilage, which I wish we had time to go into, but we don't. So arthritis is caused by loss of that cartilage. I hope that you got a chance to watch my video on what is arthritis. And in that video, we talked about arthritis just simply being caused by wearing away this cartilage. An arthritic joint. And here's what that might look like. Can you see the difference between the arthritic joint and the normal joint? What is it? Exactly. I heard you again, you got it right again. It's that there is no cartilage. The cartilage is gone. In other words, bone on bone. Cartilage is usually worn out worse on one side than it is the other side in an arthritic joint, especially if it's osteoarthritis. So the problem is simple. What is the problem here? Well, the problem is loss of the cartilage. The nice thing about that is if the problem is simple, the solution is simple. Now let's just pretend for just a second that you are a mechanic. And let's pretend like this is not a knee, let's pretend like this is your car. And how would you fix it if the bearing was worn out? Exactly. You'd replace that bearing. The question is, how are you going to replace it? See, here's the problem. Cartilage is very difficult for the body to make. Once the cartilage is damaged, the body cannot repair it, and despite billions and billions of dollars of research, man has not yet figured out how to make cartilage. And it doesn't look like, really, to be honest with you, we're anywhere close to that for the next 10 years. But we can make artificial cartilage. The artificial cartilage is made out of metal and plastic. So let's draw a typical joint replacement and see how that works. It's actually pretty simple. So here is a joint replacement. In a joint replacement, the first thing we do is we trim off about ½ an inch of each of the bones so that it looks like that. So just a little bit of the bone and damaged cartilage is removed. And then that is replaced with artificial cartilage made of metal and plastic, and it would look something like this. We put a metal cap over the end of the bone here. And then a plastic bearing. It's a very special plastic called highly cross-linked ultra-high molecular weight polyethylene. I promise I'm not going to ask you what the name of the plastic is. And the plastic bearing is attached to a metal plate which has about 1.5 inch stem which goes down inside of the bone. And that is the new joint. So it's really simple. You replace that lost cartilage with artificial cartilage made of metal and plastic. Now, this is a knee joint replacement. What would it look like in the hip? Let me just draw that for you right quick. Actually, the first joint that was replaced in the world was the hip joint. It was by this madman named John Charnley in England. And this guy was crazy. And so he was actually a mechanical engineer. He also happened to be an orthopedic surgeon. And he had being a mechanical engineer, he had a kind of a tool shop in his basement. He called this his laboratory. And here's the problem. In England, they have a huge amount of arthritis of the hip, especially back then. We're talking about the late 1950s. So what this crazy guy did was he decided he was going to figure out a way to solve that problem. So first of all, let me draw for you a normal hip joint. And as you can see, I am not an artist, but I think this makes a lot more sense if you see a drawing. So what I'm attempting to draw for you is a pelvis and as many tens of thousands of these as I've drawn, you'd think I'd be better at it than I am. And so here is what a normal hip joint looks like. It's a simple joint. It's a ball that fits inside of the socket. And the ball doesn't touch the socket because there's something in between the ball and the socket. And I know you know what it is. What is it? That's right, cartilage. Well done. So let's put the cartilage in here. So I've drawn it in solid orange and striped orange to help you realize there's cartilage that covers the socket and cartilage that covers the ball, and that's a normal hip joint. Now, what would an arthritic hip look like? Yeah, you're right. It's pretty simple. This is what an arthritic hip's going to look like. See, I told you, you do not have to be a doctor to understand this stuff. It just makes good old common sense. So what's the difference between this and that? The problem is that the cartilage is worn away. So how do you solve this problem? What did John Charnley, the crazy guy, do? Well, he got Teflon and he covered the ball and covered the socket, and that made the pain, in humans he did this, and that made the pain go away for a few months until the Teflon disintegrated. And then the joint was worse off than it had ever been, and people were thinking, oh my God, this guy's a madman. What's going on here? So he went back down into his basement and he did some experimentation in his laboratory, and he found that the materials that decrease the friction best, not as good as a human joint, which can decrease the friction to less than 1/8 of the amount of friction of an ice skate on ice, but he found that if you use high molecular weight polyethylene plastic and metal, in his case he used stainless steel because he didn't have the modern alloys we have these days, but he used stainless steel, and he found that that could decrease the friction to about the same as an ice skate on ice. So here's what Dr. Charnley did. He put in a plastic cup like this, And he used, back in those days, they used bone cement. We no longer use that, but back in those days, he used bone cement to attach it to the bone. And then an artificial ball went inside of the socket. The ball was attached to a metal stem, which went down inside of the bone. And back in those days, it was attached to the bone once again with bone cement. We now have better things than that. But that's the way the first hip joint replacement was done. And lo and behold, many people in England who were crippled became basically normal people, and it is the second most successful operative or medical intervention that we have in medicine today. And this madman, they decided, was not mad after all. His name was John Charnley, and we now know him as Sir John Charnley because he was knighted by the Queen of England for his contribution to science. So this is how a joint replacement works. See, it's pretty simple. You replace the lost cartilage with artificial cartilage made of metal and plastic.